Is there a pass-around mic?
Yes.
Okay, terrific.
Can I
Good.
adjust your microphone
Yeah.
a little bit off to the side there? Is that
I'm
okay
going
by
to
you?
start this
Okay.
morning, even though there are some people who are still coming in. And now that Bart is ready and wired, and all of you are finding it in the sanctuary this morning instead of in the chapel, I can't quite explain that, but we're glad you're here, and we hope more people will arrive. So with that, I will say welcome. And did you all get a handout or have access to one? Because if you didn't, Kay Walbert has some over there in the aisle. Because rather than taking my time away from Bart to speak his credentials, you have been given a brief introduction to the speaker of the morning. Bart Den Boer, who doesn't object to which syllable of his last name that you emphasize, as long as you do not drop the N. When months ago our committee was delighted to gain Bart's consent to join our mosaic of classes for this morning, how little we knew that when he could set out the world into chaos in order to better illustrate his points. To maximize his time, your handout can provide some of his credentials. And with that, Bart, we're proud to claim you and Pat as recent members of Third Church. And with God's blessings, please begin.
Great. Thank you, Peg. There is also a resource sheet on the very front pew in case you might be interested in pursuing some things that we talk about this morning that I think are helpful to go a little deeper in what we're going to talk about. So as Peg mentioned a long time ago, this was going to be a nice little academic discussion in a room sitting around tables, and that has changed. Also, the title has changed, the 5 Key Understandings for Americans. That's a little different than Reformed Reflections, okay? So 5 Key Understandings for Americans come out of my experience listening to the way the news media covers the current conflict, and all the time coming up with, yeah, but, you need to understand the larger context in which all this is happening. And so my presentation today will be in an attempt to provide Americans a context of what the current situation is. Where did it come from? What's happening that makes it the way it is? I'm not going to cover everything. There's going to be lots of concepts that I'm not going to be able to cover. Probably every concept that we do cover could take a whole hour all by itself. And so it's going to be a summary, and we'll take it from there. Finally, I hope that after each section, there are like 4 or 5 sections to the presentation. After each individual section, I'm going to ask if you have questions about that section. And then we can kind of take questions as we go section by section rather than by waiting till the very end. And there will be opportunity at the very end. We'll see how the time goes. Okay? So, yeah, let's begin. Key understandings for Americans. I'm going to look at these 5. A brief history, settler colonialism, part 1 and part 2. That's going to be melded into the history and the occupation section of it, so it doesn't really have a section of its own, but key to understand. The occupation of the West Bank, the siege of Gaza, and by that I'm referring to the decades-long siege, not the one that's happening in the last 4 or 5 weeks, and then the concept of apartheid. So those are the those are the sections, and we'll begin toward the end. That the key, in my opinion, to addressing the situation ends up to be equal human rights for everybody in Israel-Palestine. And so this is going to be heading in that direction. So, and we'll have questions about that too if you like. A brief history. Zionism, 1880s, people in, the Jewish people in Europe, because they've been persecuted for a long time, not just the Holocaust. Wouldn't it be great if we had our own place to live, our own country? This is along with the Germans having their own country and the French having their own country. We are a people, why can't we have our own country? And the Zionist movement was not a religious movement at that time. And just, we are a people, we should have our own place to live. Along with that, of course, is something that everybody in this room is affected by, and that's Christian Zionism. Whether or not you are affected by it politically, you have been affected by it because it's such a major mainstream aspect of American Christian fundamentalism. We've all been affected by the fact that the people of Israel need to have their own place, and they deserve that place to live. And we've heard that over and over and over again. So the two main factors, Zionism and Christian Zionism, led to the beginning of a thinking that these people, the Jewish people, should have their own place to live. All right? Wasn't necessarily even Palestine to begin with. Ghana, where they thought about Ghana, they thought about Argentina, etc. So that's Zionism. All right? Taking a step back a little bit, the Ottoman Empire. In the 13th, 12th, 13th century, they take over what is now Palestine. The Ottoman Empire is a Jewish empire? No. Christian empire? No. What kind of empire is it? It's an Islamic empire, all right? Which is going to play into the future of our current situation. The Ottoman Empire chose to fight on the side of Germany in World War I. And what happened to Germany in World War I? They were defeated. Many people think leading to World War II. But after World War I, the Middle East, as we know it today, was divided up by the victors, the European countries. And French got their part, the German got their part, British got its part, called the British Mandate. All right? A British Mandate was for the British to take care of Palestine until they could rule itself. All right? And so there's this section that we call, the British Mandate. I'll call it the British Mandate. Greater Palestine, we'll call it. And then, of course, during World War II, the Nazi Holocaust happened. Huge sympathy for the Jewish people. And the World War II ending, again with the Allies victorious, led to the Zionism asking for a place to live, and this place to live is Palestine. Right? That led to this, which is the 1947 partition plan that is was on the books, that this is what the land would look like. Anything that is in light beige there was the land of Israel, the land for the Jews. All right. Anything in gray was the land for the Palestinians. Right? Make sense? All right. This was UN mandated and supported, but it was settler colonialism in that there was this group of people where thing wasn't working out very well in where they were living, wanted to move to somewhere else and take over the land where, well, some other people were living, a lot of other people were living. Regardless, settler colonialism in this case was mandated by the UN or allowed by the UN. And so we have lots and lots of Jewish people moving into the area in what is now Palestine. right? Settler colonialism, the theme was a people without a land, the Jews, for a land without a people, okay? Now, that phrase was half right. It was a people without a land. Unfortunately, it was not a land without a people, right? So there were lots of people living in this land. After the War of Independence, which happened in 1948, Israel calls it the War of Independence. The Palestinians call it the Nakba, or the Great Catastrophe. When Israel was founded, it was immediately attacked by 5 Arab armies. And in a miracle of history, the Jewish people won, and the current outlines of Israel-Palestine are basically what happened at the end of the war in 1948, with a few changes, etc. But during that time, during the War of Independence, or the Nakba, as we've come to call it, the red dots on the map are about 500 or so Palestinian villages, about 750,000 Palestinians were removed from those villages and became refugees in Lebanon, Jordan, the West Bank, and Gaza. So that we have a situation now where the descendants of those refugees are not 750,000 anymore, they're 6.5 million refugees from this original Nakba, from the Palestinian perspective, War of Independence from the Israeli perspective. There are a total of 14 million Palestinians in the world, so about 6 million of them are refugees. And what we have now left in the current boundaries, as we see them right now. The current recognized international boundaries, you noticed how much the land of Israel has increased. And generally, international law, if you are attacked and you win back land in war, that's yours. That's okay. So generally recognized international boundaries. You see Israel in the light beige. You see the West Bank, which is Palestinian territories, in the light brown, and Gaza is in the dark brown. So that's basically the currently recognized borders. That's how we got to where we are today. Couple notes. What about the West Bank and Gaza? Why do they have two different political systems? In the West Bank, there's basically the Fatah party, the Palestinian Authority. They are in charge in the West Bank. In Gaza, Hamas is in charge. How did that happen? In the early 2000s, there was a democratic election in Palestine. Guess who won? Hamas. The presidency stayed with Fatah, and the legislator, now kind of a parliamentary system, went over to Hamas. There was fighting between the two groups. Hamas took over Gaza, and Fatah took over, or stayed in charge in the West Bank. Now, why would a people vote in favor of Hamas? Has to do with, I think, 3 things. Hamas is a political organization, it is a military organization, and it is a social service organization. All right? Now, what do we always hear about Hamas? We always hear the military side, and that's our American perspective, and that's what we're going to hear about that. We don't hear about the political side so much, although you may be aware that Hamas has a diplomatic mission in Qatar. What we never hear about is the social service aspect of it. We never hear about the hospitals that they run, or the schools that they have, or the counseling centers that they run. We don't hear about that. We also don't hear about the other aspect, the mirror aspect of it, is Fatah in the West Bank one that is most friendly to Israel and one that the United States supports the most is seen by Palestinians as corrupt. They're also seen by Palestinians as being an arm of the Israeli occupation, which has some shades of truth to it, by the way. And so what we have in the situation of a populace voting for Hamas versus Fatah, you have one organization looked at as corrupt and supporting the occupation, and you have another organization, Hamas, which, by the way, is seen as an organization of integrity. Whoa. From an American standpoint, how can a terrorist organization be an organization of integrity? All right? A genuine question. But the fact is, Palestinian people see Hamas as an organization of integrity. On the other side of that is the majority of Palestinians do not support terrorism. They do not support what Hamas did. They're as horrified as anybody else about what Hamas did. And if there was an election today, quite frankly, I don't know who would win. But the idea is Hamas is seen as an organization of integrity. So that's why you have two separate entities. Finally, Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu, anyway, his theory and his idea has been to play the Palestinian Authority and Hamas against each other, because as long as the Palestinians are divided politically, there's nobody to talk to for as far as a peace agreement is concerned. And as long as the Palestinians are divided, obviously that's in Israel's favor if you're looking at it geopolitically. Benjamin Netanyahu has actually helped support Hamas in allowing Qatari funds to go to Hamas. That was in the last couple of years. He has also helped the PA, and again, he plays the two against each other. So at the same time that the two are being played against each other by Israel, Israel is saying we can't have peace because we have nobody to talk to. Nobody represents the Palestinians. All right, so that's how we are right now. Okay, any questions about any of that? Okay, the other aspect is kind of missed, I think, is we started this presentation with the 1880s. We did not start with Jacob and Esau. We did not start with Isaac and Ishmael, all right? Most scholars believe this is a modern problem. It is not an ancient problem. It doesn't stem from people hating each other because they're two different people groups. It stems from, well, other reasons that some people have to hate each other, all right? So the current population, let's take a look at this, and this is surprising to lots of people. In this whole area that we generally call Israel-Palestine, easy numbers, let's just say there's roughly 7 million Israelis and roughly 7 million Palestinians. And the Palestinians are distributed throughout the whole region. For example, there's lots of people in Israel that are Palestinian. There are Palestinian Israelis. There are Palestinians who are Israeli citizens. They're about 20% of the population. There's the West Bank, which is the occupied West Bank. Obviously, there's Gaza. And so that total of all the Palestinians that are living there are about 7 million. And there are about 7 million Jewish Israelis as well in the same area, which of course means that about half of the population is Jewish Israelis and about half the population are Palestinians. All right. Overall, 20% in Israel, 20% of the population is Palestinian. About 20%, maybe a little less, are Orthodox, practicing Jewish people. All right. They live according to the Old Testament law. Reform or conservative Jewish make up about 25%. These are people whose religion is a very important part of their life, but they're not Orthodox, all right? The secular population of Israel is about 55%. So most of the people in the modern state of Israel are secular, and of course there's tensions between those groups, especially between the Orthodox and the secular. In Palestine, Muslims 98%, Christians about 2%, and Christians make up less than 2% of the population in Israel as well. The 10% of Palestinians are Christian, and of course if they're 20% of the population, that means about 2% of them are Christians in the modern state of Israel. So if you have one entity wanting to control the other entity, and they're both equal population, how does that work? How does one half of the population control the other half of the population? Well, the controlling half has to have lots and lots of advantages, wouldn't you say? Like military, like social, like educational, etc. That's basically what our situation is here. The occupation, basically the occupation of the West Bank. This is settler colonialism part 2. This is not like the first part, settler colonialism, where it was mandated by the UN. This is internationally recognized illegal occupation or taking over of occupied land. There's nothing in international law saying you cannot occupy another country. It's supposed to be short-term, etc. But there's rules about occupying a country, and one of them is you can't take your own population and put them in that occupied land. That has not been the case with the modern state of Israel. Since they occupied the West Bank in 1967, about 750,000 Jewish people have moved into settlements in the occupied West Bank. Now, a settlement is a government-supported and subsidized town that has all the amenities of, well, your town, and is a modern society in every way, shape, or form. It just happens to be in the West Bank. So 750,000 or so in about 230 such communities in the West Bank. Tangential to that, of course, is we are all here today in this room. We are all here at least partially because of settler colonialism. Our ancestors, things weren't working out very well for them, or they saw more opportunity somewhere else. So what did they do? I'm a third-generation Dutch guy, all right? My grandparents moved here because life was going to be better here than in the Netherlands. And most of us are. Now, why is that important? Politically, settler colonialism is in America's DNA. It is something that we don't like to talk about, but it's kind of part of who we are. That's a sobering thought. And it may have to do with the fact that this sort of thing happens in Israel, and, well, we just don't say much about it. The current illegal settlements on the other's land is a comparison between Israel and Palestine. Obviously, Palestine has no illegal settlements in Israel. I mean, that concept is laughable. In the other way around, there's 260 or so illegal Israeli settlements on Palestinian land. So let's take a look at how is that one half of those people, how are you going to control the other half of the people? Well, one of the tactics for intimidation is nighttime raids. The Israeli Defense Forces go into Palestine, knock on the door, 2 o'clock in the morning, and arrest mostly teenage boys, all right? They take them away for about a week. They don't have legal aid. Their parents don't know where they are. They're taken into Israel, which again is against international law. You can an occupying force can enforce law, but they cannot remove people from the occupied land to the other country. These are kids. These are not adults. Administrative detention is something where somebody where the IDF, Israel Defense Force, takes a child out of a home and just keeps them there. They don't charge them with anything. They just keep them there for an indefinite period of time. Not charged, nothing. All right? 160 currently are in security, they're security detainees. Those are the ones that are there for a week or 2 weeks, et cetera. They interrogate the kids, they ask them for names of people that might be doing bad stuff, et cetera, and that sort of thing. Now, this is bad enough just on the surface of it, but these raids happen routinely, weekly, throughout the West Bank, and they mainly serve as intimidation factors. It's an intimidating factor from the IDF. It keeps the Palestinian people on their edge, all right? Home demolitions. Look at this. 7 Israeli homes have been demolished by Palestinians, and almost 57,000 Palestinian homes have been demolished by Israel since 1967. Now, a lot of these homes include the ones that are bombed out in Gaza. And that's a very, very efficient way to demolish a home. I mean, no doubt about it. All right. About 10,000, however, homes have been demolished in the West Bank. Well, why were those homes demolished? 2 reasons. In the West Bank, if you are accused of a crime, a serious crime, you can have your home demolished. I'm not found guilty, accused. So a lot of homes are demolished because, frankly, you might have done something bad or maybe didn't do something bad, but you were accused by Israel of a crime, and so they come and demolish your home. Imagine that, your home. The other way is, even though it's West Bank, the Oslo Accords gave Israel the right to determine who builds what in the West Bank. All right? Guess how many house building permits are granted in the West Bank by Israel? Almost none. All right? So now you have the population of the Palestinian territory growing, and they need a place to live. They apply for a permit. Years, 8, 10 years, they don't hear anything. All right? What do? You build anyway. All right? Israel comes along, says, that house is illegal. Didn't have a permit. Yeah, technically it's true. They didn't have a permit. But they couldn't get one. So the house is demolished. So, yeah, they warn the people. They say, we're going to demolish your house. You got an hour to get all your stuff out of here. So, yeah, that happens. That's another tactic by the occupier to intimidate the occupied. And of course, if you're accused of doing something wrong, then what does it do? You're very careful. You hardly dare to go outside. The occupation, land confiscation. As you look at that, you can see the one on the left is in 1947. That was before the partition. And then the green is the Palestinian-controlled land, and the white is the Israeli-controlled land. All that is to say, if you are a Palestinian, what do? Let me tell you a story. This is Amin. Amin is a friend of ours. He's a Muslim. He lives in the village of Tekoa. When Amin was 18 years old, he threw a rock at an Israeli soldier. Well, you figure if you throw a rock at an Israeli soldier, you're going to get in trouble, right? He got into trouble. All right? He was taken in for a month. He was put in solitary confinement. For a year, he was brought to the prison in Megiddo and had to serve out his sentence there. I said, Amin, why did you throw a rock at that soldier? He said, I saw my mother crying. I saw my father crying. I couldn't help myself. Why were they crying? The bulldozer was there. They were bulldozing my parents' olive trees, taking my parents' land away to build the settlement at Tekoa. There's an Israeli settlement at Tekoa. The Arab Tekoa is up on the hill, the settlements, etc. So Amin is somebody who threw a rock at an Israeli soldier because the IDF, was taking his parents' ancient land for the sake of an illegal settlement. When he was released from detention, he was blacklisted, which means he can never leave the West Bank except through Jordan. He can't go to Israel at all. He can't work in Israel, etc. And his movements are severely restricted. We went camping with Amin, overlooking the Dead Sea in the Judean wilderness. And in the morning, there's this young couple. The sun was coming up over the Moab mountains, and the young couple was there for their engagement. They came from somewhere, and Amin didn't know where they came from. So he goes and talks to them, and he says, "Why, hey, great, what are you guys doing here?" He said, they said, we're from the settlement of Tekoa, and we're here to get engaged. And Amin invited them to join us for breakfast, even though that young couple was living in the village that he was put in prison for defending. Okay? He's been working for peace ever since, in terms of he sees what's happening and doesn't know what else to do about it other than to try to figure out some way that this needs to stop. Okay? So that's the history and the occupation. Any questions? Yeah.
A very simple question, Bart. When you talk about settlement of the Israelis, are you talking about the kibbutz?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. A kibbutz is a fancy word for a co-op where people live together in a community, and they all basically support the same business that's located in that community. We stay in kibbutzes a lot. They're hotels run by the community around it. All right. And so when you heard about Hamas attacking kibbutzim, those are communities of people that are dedicated to work together, and they share ownership in a business venture. Okay, it is a prime mechanism of. There's nothing wrong with kibbutzim in themselves, but they are a prime mechanism of settler colonialism. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. The siege of Gaza. Since 2006, when Israel used to have settlements in Gaza too, they don't have settlements there anymore. It wasn't working. So in 2006, they left. I remember the anguished looks on people's faces, et cetera, when they're leaving Gaza, the settlers. And since that time, Israel has sealed off Gaza and has left. They control everything that goes in and out of Gaza, everything. So it's a little bit like an open air. It's been called an open air prison. It is a prison. Gazans can't leave, and people can't visit. I'll show you a picture in a couple minutes of one of our best friends in the West Bank whose sister was dying of cancer, and she could not get permit to see her sister before she died. So access is completely controlled by Gaza. 2.2 million Gazans, 1.7 million of Gazans are refugees. So those are the descendants of all those little red dots on those on the map from before that had to flee to some refugee camp. These refugees fled to Gaza. Now, there are 1.7 million of those refugees. You say, well, how can they be refugees? Aren't they all dead? I mean, 1948 is a long time away. Well, if you're born to a refugee, you have refugee status. And of course, Palestinians are prolific. I mean, they have a high birth rate. And so lots and lots of refugees in Gaza. We had Mark Braverman in the other week. He's a Jewish expert on all of this. And it's his belief that the attacks on the kibbutzim from Hamas were done by the third generation descendants of the Palestinians who lived in those villages that are now kibbutzim. And of course, that's very difficult to track all of that, but that's likely what happened. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Hamas does control Gaza. Hamas controls Gaza to the detriment of the Palestinian people. However, many Palestinians see Hamas, at least somebody is standing up for us. They may not appreciate the methods that Hamas uses, but at least somebody is standing up for us. So although they may not win an election, it's difficult for Palestinians to condemn Hamas as a whole, even though the Christians in the West Bank did not hesitate. They immediately condemned what Hamas did. The Hamas as a group, as an organization, is not likely to be eliminated. Why? Because Hamas is an idea. It's an ideology as much as it is a group or a terrorist group. Hamas gets its idea, and this is the way to think about it. A helpful way to think about this is, can you understand how a group does A, B, or C without approving A, B, or C? Can you understand where they're coming from without approving it? And that's what's hard for Americans to do, in my opinion. How could Hamas do what they did? Let's even take it off the table about that horrific massacre. Let's pretend that didn't happen. Hamas does terrible things. I mean, they shoot rockets at Israel, not caring where they hit. I mean, October 7th was bad enough, but Hamas has plenty of black marks about it, even without talking about that. Where are they coming from? Let's go back to 1947. You're living in one of those villages. Somebody, somewhere, probably in New York, says it's okay for a bunch of white guys, Europeans, to come and take away your ancient land, which to them is not like our real estate. I mean, I have a house. I like my house. When I sell my house, it's not going to be a big deal. I mean, I'll find some other place to live, and I'm not attached to that piece of real estate, not like Eastern peoples are attached to the land. Indigenous Palestinians are a lot like American Indians. This land is our land. It's who we are. It's part of who we are. So when Hamas says we will not recognize the modern state of Israel, they're thinking back to 1947 and saying, who are you, United Nations, to say that some Europeans can come and live on our land? And not only that, but when those Europeans came, they destroyed our villages. They massacred many of our people. And so Hamas says, eye for eye. Now, I don't agree at all with any violence achieving anything. And what we have, but I have to admit, I can understand that viewpoint. And at least when you understand your enemy's viewpoint, because I think Hamas is our enemy, I do, I think it's Israel's enemy, I think it's our enemy. When you understand your enemy's viewpoint, you have more tools to deal with that enemy, for what that's worth. The siege of Gaza. We talk in terms of numbers, and as Pastor Ryan mentioned, these are real people. It's a picture of us with Elaine. Elaine is the second person from the left, the sister of our dear friend Nua on the far left. Strange situation. They ask us, me and Pat, to take them around Israel and Palestine because they cannot get into Israel, except this was during Easter, so they got permission to go to Israel for over a week's period. And so we rented a car, and because they can't rent a car, and we had American driver's licenses. Their Palestinian driver's licenses are no good in Israel, so we got to take them around Israel. This is a lane at Caesarea Maritima, and she was killed on the IDF attack on the Orthodox Christian Church in Gaza on the 30th of October. And again, these are, people that you sat and had dinner with. We sat and had dinner with, 10 years ago now. And of course, every one of those is dear. And of course, we're connected mostly with the Christian community in Bethlehem. And they have relatives in Gaza. And so, like lots of folks, we fall into the trap of thinking that a Christian death is somehow more significant. It isn't. But obviously, when you know somebody, it brings about the reality of it. Siege of Gaza. Any questions about the siege of Gaza?
It looks like Gaza has a long coast with the Mediterranean. How can they be cut off if they have all of that
Yeah.
coastline?
Israel has a navy. Yeah, that's it. They don't allow anybody in and out. Airspace, Israel controls the airspace, so Israel does not allow it to have an airport. And so, Israel is an amazing country. It is technologically superior to almost any other country, period. Almost any other country. Its military is one of the most highly trained in the world. They make the desert bloom. Their agricultural studies are second to none, etc. It's very easy to fall in love with the modern state of Israel. And all of its amenities, etc., make it very, very difficult to fight against. And the Palestinians, well, you know what guerrilla warfare is. Guerrilla warfare is not what it's non-equivalent warfare. There's another word for it, but it's when one side has so little and the other side has so much. The side that has so little resorts to hit and run tactics, guerrilla warfare, suicide bombing, that sort of thing. And that's the Palestinian situation. So yeah, long answer to why don't they just use the sea? It's because Israel doesn't allow it. Okay, Itamar Cohen, he's an Israeli, the only Israeli that invited us into his house. We were hiking up on Mount Hermon and trying to find a way down the mountain, and Pat went to talk to him and says, hey, is there a way that we can hike down the mountain? And we got talking, and he said, hey, why don't you come over to our house? And so this is way up north in Israel, and he lives just east of the Sea of Galilee in the Golan Heights. Now that's significant because the Golan Heights is occupied territory. Israel took it from Syria in 1967, and there's no problem at all, no security problems in the Golan Heights because all the Syrians just left, and yeah. So, but anyway, he's a settler and he's lived there his whole life. Every time that we go to Israel, we stop over and we ask Itamar to tell us about his life as a settler in the Golan Heights, and he is first of all, he's an atheist. Right? He's not a religious Jew. And he is very quick to tell us that like he's proud of it, almost. But he makes no bones about the fact that he does not like to live with Arabs. And he's a nice guy. He's got a nice family. But I put his picture up there for the idea of how this idea of apartheid is deeply accepted in Israeli society. Not by everybody. There's some really, really strong anti-apartheid, anti-war organizations in Israel, so I don't want to paint too big of a brush here. But he's a staunch, unapologetic promoter of separation of Arabs and Israelis, or Arabs and Jews, if you will. He's a secular Jew. So, again, a real person that we hang around with. So apartheid, is it just my opinion that it's apartheid? Well, no, it's not. Amnesty International, this is from Amnesty International here, that's on the screen. They have identified Israel as an apartheid country. B'Tselem is an Israeli human rights group from Jerusalem that's identified its own country as apartheid. And of course, Human Rights Watch is another international organization that keeps a watch on human rights activities throughout the land, throughout the world. So, so what is it? Fragmentation into domains of control. Palestinians are put in these little, we used to call them Bantustans in South Africa. That's basically what they are, where your movement is limited between one zone of control and another zone of control. Of course, there's discriminatory land and property seizures and home demolitions. We talked about that. And again, there are no home demolitions of Israelis. Israelis don't demolish homes of Israelis. Okay? It's only Palestinians that they demolish homes of. A lot of segregation and control. In fact, it is illegal for an Israeli to go into the West Bank. Now, Israelis do it all the time, but there's this big sign up when you go into the West Bank that says, illegal for Israelis to enter. We cannot guarantee your safety. That's a sign by the Israeli government telling Israeli citizens that you better not come here, it's dangerous. We can't guarantee your safety in the West Bank. Technically, it's illegal. Lots of people still do it. However, most Israelis don't know any Palestinians from the West Bank. They've never been there. They may know Palestinians that are part of the state of Israel, but they don't know any West Bank Palestinians. Most West Bank Palestinians have never met an Israeli that's not a soldier. So, deprivation of economic and social rights. If you hang out in Bethlehem, for 2 weeks, you know that the unemployment rate there is about 25%. And across the street, across the wall, I should say, in Beit Safafa, which is the first Israeli community north of Bethlehem, it's about 4%. And so there's very little doubt that the policies of apartheid and separation have taken a huge social and economic toll on Palestinians. UN resolutions targeting Israel and the Palestinians. 78 UN resolutions against Israel and only 1 against the Palestinians regarding apartheid and other military and international violations. The United States vetoes every resolution against Israel. Every resolution against Israel is vetoed by the United States. Political prisoners, again, apartheid. Yes, there are 240 Israelis now being held in Gaza, the hostages, horrible situation. However, there are over 5,000 Palestinians being held, many of them without charge and without trial and without legal representation. Not all of them, many of them. Now, of course, we've all heard, appropriately so, about the 240 hostages being held. We've all heard about that. My guess is that most of us have not heard about the 5,200 Palestinians being held. They're political prisoners, not felony prisoners. So, Israelis and Palestinians killed in the current violence. Of course, there's way too many, 21,000 Palestinians. That includes the latest since October 7, and about 2,500 Israelis, including the ones massacred by Hamas on October 7. So it's about, it's in the name of 10 to 1. Now this is a 2018 study. The rate of U.S. news reporting on deaths among both populations, where Americans are 4 times likely to hear about the death of Israelis than we are to hear about the deaths of Palestinians. And in my experience, both in talking with fellow Americans and in watching the news reports in America, that's exactly true. You don't hear about Palestinians being killed by Israelis, but every time an Israeli is killed, we hear about it. It shouldn't make a difference what the ethnicity is. So, kind of conclusion, the situation today is grim. There's very little hope. Munther Isaac, Bethlehem Bible College theologian, there's no one coming to save the Palestinian people from the oppression by Israel and the United States. That's a key quote, because people in Palestine, anyway, believe that there are 2 entities that can help this situation. One is Israel, and one is the United States. And the best thing that could happen is with both Israel and the United States working together to help this situation. But neither of them will. So, support the oppressed. Support the oppressed. If Palestinians are being oppressed, support Palestinians. Jewish people are being oppressed, support Jewish people. Support the oppressed. Isn't Israel our friend? Yes, Israel is our friend. Friends demonstrate love and friendship by holding each other accountable. Yes, it is possible to be for Israel and to be for Palestine and to be for equal human rights for everybody. I'm looking forward to the day when the United States holds Israel accountable to international law, not to punish Israel, but for their own peace and security In my opinion, and in the opinion of Kairos West Michigan, there's one way forward, and that's for all parties to recognize equal human rights for all parties in Israel-Palestine. That is what's going to lead to the long-term security of the people of Israel, the long-term economic security, military security, etc. As long as violence reigns, there will be more violence. And I would just encourage all of us, we can be for the best interests of Israel by holding them accountable to even agreed upon standards of international human rights, even without going down the road of asking them to be God's chosen people and live according to the prophets, which would also be a reasonable thing to do. So yeah, let's be for Israel by holding them accountable. And let's be for Palestine by supporting their need for equal human rights. I know Hamas is a problem. Hamas isn't going away. Hamas isn't going to buy into this equal human rights thing. It's a problem. All right? I don't know the answer to that. But the answer isn't the road that we've been on. Any questions? We are 1 minute away from 25. Yeah.
Bart, it's easy to understand the resentment, I think, on the part of the Palestinians. I've seen the refugee camps, know that story gets carried on generation to generation and just keeps building. You see the disaffection of the youth, etc. Is it possible to let that resentment go?
There are many organizations that are working toward that. One is Holy Land Trust. They have a message called Healing Trauma. Trauma causes exactly the kind of thing that causes more trauma. If you traumatize a whole population, that population will act out of trauma. And by the way, the Israeli population is also traumatized. There's no doubt about that. And people even talk about Holocaust trauma still being, well, that's typical American. Holocaust trauma is real and living in the lives of Israeli citizens. So they're traumatized historically. And whenever stuff like this happens at Hamas, they're traumatized again. The Hamas attack on Israel would be the equivalent of 50,000 Americans being killed on 9/11. 50,000, that according to their population, if you compare the populations. So it's huge trauma. Both sides are traumatized. And there are organizations that, there are lots of really good people working hard, and that's why this October 7 and the response has been so disquieting and so discouraging. Lifetime's work of Musalaha, Salim Munir. I've worked 30 years, and now people can't look at each other without hatred in their eyes. And I've been working against that for 30 years. Yeah, there are ways forward. One more thing. There can be a will in leadership for equal human rights for everybody. Right now, that's not the will. The will on both sides right now is it's our land, not yours, and one of us has to leave. Or one of us has to be in charge, or one of us has to put the other under their thumb. That's what each side is saying. We can't live together. One's got to be in charge. That's the basic political statement from each side. That has to change, like it did in South Africa, to we're both going to be here. We got to find a way to live together. Or 20 years from now, we're going to have another October 7. Yeah. Thank you. I do have some more. If you're interested in any of, there's a pile of sheets that have